Okay, guys, so my next video that I'm going to be doing is working with creating the illusion of fur. And I'm not going this is assuming now that you understand the colors that you're choosing to create the fur. So it's really only about how you go about doing, creating fur. So what the first thing that you really want to be ready for is your pencils. You want to make sure that these guys here are super sharp. Okay, if they are dull, then you're not going to get the fine detail of the fur that you want. So make sure they're sharp, make sure they stay sharp. Fur is not something that is going to end up being too thick in various areas, so you're probably going to be able to just be just fine doing whatever you're doing with sharp pencils. Okay, so our key to this whole thing is to make sure that you figure out what go from your light colors to your dark colors, okay? In most instances, you guys can figure out exactly what's light and what's dark just by looking at them. Typically, if you get to a point where you're just not sure, then you're okay just kind of choosing one to be the light and one to be the dark. So in the case of these two browns here, I know I can tell that one's darker, but it's pretty close. So, if you just can't figure it out, then go ahead and make your own choice on that. Okay. So your base of the fur is going to start out with your lightest color, okay? So my light color here is going to be this brown that I'm ending up using. So what I'm doing is I'm using the same technique throughout, okay? So don't kind of deviate from that. What you're looking for is to create a line or lines that are only as long as the lines of the fur that you're drawing. And the other thing to look for is to make sure that the fur itself is going the right direction. Okay, fur does not go the same way. Okay, if you had your hair doesn't all go the same way. It depends on where it's curved on the head. It depends on if there's like a cowlick. Anything like that will change the direction that you're looking at. So make sure that you have your length and know ahead of time. So don't go into it, starting with this short stroke and then continue all the way through till you're done with the drawing, only to find out later on that part of the drawing needed to be longer or shorter or a different direction of the hair. Know where you go before you go. Okay, so I'm starting with this, and you'll see I'm actually moving the direction, so it starts out here and it starts to work its way up in this around this area here. Okay, so I'm just going to get a small base down. My next step is I'm going to go over and I'm going to start by hitting this area a little bit in a few different spots with the next darker. Now what we're doing here is we're creating the illusion of depth in our hair. So the darker that it gets, the more deep it looks more shadow based, and then that's how you end up being able to show what is the higher hair, what's the lower hair, okay? So that's what you want to try to gather with it. So some of the areas you might end up bringing in a little bit of this. It's not going to be exactly the same as your first one, and it may not cover the same amount as your first color that you're using. Okay, so we'll do a little bit of that. Then our next step is looking for the shadow. So what if I went through and I said, okay, in this base, I wanted to make sure that I have a good shadow, meaning that this retains the lightness. This becomes a little bit darker as I'm working down. So what I'm doing is going in next with my next darker color. All right, and then finally, when I get done, I'm going to zip in and I'm going to just use this a little bit more to create sort of this dark area. Now, what I'm looking at here, you'll notice that some people may notice that I'm actually using this indigo blue for my dark shadow. That's because I'm really trying to stay away from black as much as possible, because black really does deaden the composition, where blues or purples or anything else that might work with shadowing will actually help the composition maintain the proper depth and volume to it. So I'm sticking with using my blue to be able to make this happen. And the other thing that works out real well too is if I use indigo blue along with this dark brown, you're going to get a very dark, almost shadow that's almost like what black would end up being without being black. So be aware of what you're doing with it. This is what the final piece looks like. I'll move it up right close so you can take a look at it. Okay, it's a little bit out of focus, but there you are. So whenever you're working, make sure you follow along with the contour, where the fur goes. Make sure you go light to dark, excluding white, folks, because if you start with white, guess what? You're not going to be able to see it. So start with the lightest color that's not white and work your way up to build up that fur. Okay. The real key is to make sure that we get rid of all this white space in between. So just like we did right here, Okay, that's what it's going to end up with. You want to leave the white space unless there's some kind of major highlight that's put into place there.